Oh, don't let this happen. Try SmokingArrest.com.
Where you are. I mean, clearly, you know, in areas of Helmand, I was there with Anderson Cooper in September, and many of the particular areas in Helmand have been cleared by the Marines, but you know, the Taliban has a tendency of melting away and showing up in other places. And according to a assessment that CNN reported on by Major General Flynn, the Chief Intelligence Officer of the United States military in Afghanistan, the Taliban has had an ability to expand its operations geographically. The briefing by this senior military intelligence officer concluded that 2010 was likely to see more violence. So, you know, the situation is not good. And, of course, last year more Afghan civilians were killed or wounded in the war than had been the case since the fall of the Taliban. But, Candy, a point I wanted to bring up is, why is Obama in Afghanistan right now? And obviously, we're not privy to exactly what is taking place with Hamid Karzai. But clearly, the big issue this year is the battle for Kandahar. There's the major southern city that is the former capital, de facto capital of the Taliban. That is really the prize for the war, the Battle of Kandahar. Who controls Kandahar? To a large degree, it is the Taliban, but also Hamid Karzai's brother, Wali Karzai. And so, you know, taking Kandahar as much as a political mission as it is a military mission. And surely that's one of the main areas of discussion that will be taking place between the two presidents, Candy.
Peter Bergen, our CNN senior national security analyst. I want you to stand by, and I want to go back to Atiya Abawi, who is our correspondent in Kabul, and picking up on what Peter just said, Atiya, looking at it from a strategic standpoint and from a security standpoint, what is the conversation, do you think, between President Obama and President Karzai at this point? What does President Obama need to push President Karzai to do?
Okay, and I just caught the end of your question over there. But President Obama, we have to remember, has been pushing President Karzai, but not face to face. This is the first time that he's actually come into the country since he was a candidate back in 2008. Right now, what he's trying to push President Karzai into doing is to fight corruption in Afghanistan. He knows that the biggest challenge right now is credibility, not just with the international community, but with the Afghan people themselves. The Afghan government, when you talk to the Afghan people, they say that Afghanistan is actually eating itself up from the inside out. They do see the war as a big problem, especially when you go to areas in the south and the east where they see the constant fighting. But the biggest problem that they see is the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces. I was just in Helmand province where the U.S. Marines launched a large offensive Operation Mushtarak just last month. When I talked to the Afghan people in the city of Marja, the first thing that they would tell you and ask you is whether the Afghan government and the Afghan forces were coming back. I was talking to men who actually supported the Taliban, even though they wanted the international community there, because they said it was the international community who could help build in their area, as they did in the 50s and 60s with USAID, building the canals and irrigation systems that we saw there. But what they were afraid of was the Afghan National Police Force coming back, the Afghan security forces coming back, because what we have to remember, in that same area in the city of Marja, the coalition forces went in there in May 2009, said that they cleared the area from the Taliban. But guess what? The Taliban came right back, and the Afghan people supported them because they saw them as less corrupt than the Afghan security forces and as well as the Afghan government. And so in some areas of Afghanistan, obviously, the Afghan people trusting the Taliban more than their own government, because the government has been a big problem for the last 8 to 9 years.
Yeah, hang on a minute. I want to bring in our Barbara Starr, who has been to this region reporting so many times and who knows it so well. She's on the phone with me now. You know, we're talking, Barbara, about the offensive in Helmand and about really sort of twin problems that the U.S. has with the Afghan government at this point. And one is its ability to sort of militarily control the country, and the other is its ability to kind of win the hearts and minds of its own population, which really really doesn't trust a government that's kind of viewed as corrupt. So when you look at it, is this all part and parcel of the same package, or is there one challenge that's bigger than the other?
Oh, Candy, I think you're absolutely right. It is all irrevocably tied together at this point. You know, General McChrystal has really come to the understanding that there will not be what he calls a U.S. military victory in Afghanistan, that the way you bring security to this country is to start working with the people across every town, every village, every mountain pass across Afghanistan, make the people believe that their lives can be better by beginning to provide economic assistance, jobs, get the farmers off of growing the poppy crop, and really leave, the idea is to leave the Taliban no room to maneuver in Afghanistan, make the people turn against them. Because, look, history shows you cannot put enough combat force into Afghanistan to win against fundamentalist ideology. The Russians learned it. The British learned it so many years ago. So this is not about a military victory in the long run. It's about counterinsurgency, which starts with winning those hearts and minds of the people. But I also think that President Obama's trip to Afghanistan must be viewed on several different levels. There's sort of that top level, working with President Karzai, talking about corruption. But the troops on the ground, the U.S. soldiers, the U.S. Marines, these kids really slogging through this very tough combat, it's very important for them to see that the commander-in-chief, even if he is not coming to their combat outpost, that he is coming to the ground that they are fighting on. This is, you know, the president hadn't been there since he was a candidate. A lot of people have been talking for many months now. When would he show up? Knowing that the health care debate in Washington was keeping him here in Washington for so many months. Still, people were watching the calendar. Not totally unexpected. A lot of people thought he would go to Afghanistan. And I think the troops are really going to be very pleased to see that he was coming all that way to see them. Candy?
I want to ask Barbara, I want to ask our correspondent in Kabul, Tia Abawi, and I want to ask Peter Bergen to stand by, all of you, to listen as I bring in Kate Baldwin. Kate, I know you're gathering sort of the details of how this trip was put together and why. What have you got for us?
Well, interesting point. National Security Advisor James Jones on the